She must have seen some woman who connected to her and she thought, I think I could do this. So she ran for the Iowa House. And at the time was the youngest person to run for the Iowa House that ever had been. And I'm sure, I know this, there were, she's too young, it's not your turn, you're from Dubuque, they're all Democrats, you should wait, you know, plowed right ahead. So when she stood there that terrible night, she'll talk about it, she looked around and she looked at the next thing and she thought, you know what, I think I can do this. And isn't that what we raise our Iowa sons and daughters to do, is to look around, look up, look out, and think, I think I can do that. So when Abby Finkenauer decided to run for Congress in the 1st district, in a district that was always going to have the eyes of the nation on it, there were a lot of people who said, please, this is ridiculous. You're too young. It's not your turn. You don't know things. And you know what? Abby Finkenauer said, oh, I know a couple things. I know this district. I know my family. I know my age group. I know what they're struggling with. I know what I'm struggling with is what they're struggling with, and I know I can make a difference. Abby Finkenauer coming into the U.S. Congress from this state will do more to wash off the stain of some of what has happened from our representatives in the U.S. Congress, the heartbreak that I know a lot of us feel when we watch it. And we are so proud to be Iowans and so proud to be Iowa Democrats. And when she gets there, we're going to be able to be proud again. And she's going to wash that away, and it's going to be the best night ever. Absolutely.
And of the polls for hosting us. Oh my goodness, what a beautiful, and the architect is here. I was telling him I love all the natural lighting, and the Kotler Conservancy, the Sisterhood, Flip It, Iowa. My goodness, the amount of work you all have been doing for our entire state is inspiring. It is why we are in the position we are in right now as a state as well as a country. And I just cannot thank you all enough. And all of you who showed up today to meet a girl from the 1st district. You know, it means a lot to me, like I said, that you are here. And some I know have been supportive for a while, and this is our first time getting to know each other or get to see each other face to face. And I gotta tell you, one of the things I like to do when I meet people for the very first time, because sometimes they look at me and they think, okay, she's been a state rep for the last 4 years, and now she's running for Congress, but she looks like she's about 16, so how'd that all happen? So I like to take it way back to where all of this really got started, back to even when I was 10 years old. And my mom came to me when my brother was doing some magazine sale for fundraiser thing when he was in junior high, and she comes to me and says, okay, Abby, which one do you want? And I think she thought for sure I was going to say Kids Bop or, you know, Disney Mag or something like that. And instead I looked at her and I smiled and I said, well, I'd really like Newsweek. And she thought, Newsweek? And, you know, my parents, I gotta be honest with you, you know, they didn't really talk about government and politics, anything like that. They were just busy. I mean, my dad worked at a town most of my life. My mom was just trying to get us to baseball or softball practice. I don't even know if they voted when I was growing up. But I tell you what they do now, and they watch a whole lot of MSNBC. It's a whole thing. But anyway, they got me my Newsweek. And it was absolutely my favorite thing. The day that that thing came, I devoured it. And then on Saturday nights, I'd go to church with my mom's entire family. I mean, she was one of 8 big German-Irish Catholic family in Dubuque. And, you know, tons of aunts and uncles. And, you know, we'd go to church. We'd walk down to my grandparents' house after church. And I'd be sitting there after dinner with my grandfather, who was a Democrat and a firefighter. My uncle, who was a Democrat and small business owner, and another uncle who was a Republican and a lawyer. And then there was me, the 10-year-old. And we would just be going back and forth about what was going on in the world because I read Newsweek. I knew sometimes more than a few things. You know, and I gotta be honest, we wouldn't always agree on a lot because, you know, lots of different opinions. But I tell you what, those nights taught me two very, very important lessons. One was even though I was a young girl, I had every right to a seat at the table as the grown men. Mm-hmm. The second was even though we would disagree, and again, oh boy would we would hug each other at the end of the night after we were leaving, say love ya and can't wait to see you next week. And I remember thinking that that's how policy, government, all this stuff is supposed to work. And that has stayed with me my entire life. You know, after that, I kept getting my Newsweek, kept paying attention. And then when I was actually in high school, I was 16 years old, I went on some random field trip. And I saw this flyer that said, live and work in Washington, D.C. and get paid. And I went, oh, that seems like a fun idea, all right. And here it was to be a page for the U.S. House of Representatives. And I applied, I ended up getting picked for both summer sessions, and off I went for my first time ever on a plane to Washington, D.C. And I gotta be honest with you, I mean, it was an interesting trip. I mean, my parents actually couldn't afford the other ticket to fly me out there with me, so I went out by myself, and my Nana found me 4 cousins that lived out there. One was a Democrat, one was a Republican. I was told they would be very tall women wearing Iowa State sweatshirts, don't hold it against them. And they'd be picking me up at the airport, and off I went for my summer working on the floor of the U.S. House of Representatives. Now, I met a lot of congressmen and congresswomen. Well, I was actually in the Republican cloakroom appointed under Jim Nussle, so mostly worked around congressmen, and I remember talking to some of them and thinking at the time, well, if this guy can do it. No, I'm not, I mean, in all seriousness, I had no idea I'd run or anything like that. But it did break down barriers that, you know, a young girl from Sherrill, Iowa, who grew up in a town with more cows than people, thought was possible. After that, I graduated high school early. I went on to be Speaker's page in the Iowa House in 2007, or as I like to call it, the good old days in Iowa, where we had the governor's mansion, the state house, and the state senate. And I got to tell you, there was a moment that completely changed my life that made me realize how important all this was. And it was when they did the call of the House, where they locked every single person in that House chamber and had them take the vote on adding sexual orientation to the Iowa Civil Rights Act. That was ultimately the vote and bill that led to Iowa being one of the first states in the country to legalize same-sex marriage. Yeah. As an 18-year-old girl sitting there having a front row seat to history being made, I remember looking out and seeing some of those representatives who've been working on that since the 80s. And they all had tears in their eyes. And, you know, I walk out of the chamber and I kind of look around and I look up and I go, oh, this government thing, this policy thing, this is where you get to fight for justice. This is where you can make an impact on your community. And again, I had no clue I'd ever run one day, but I knew there was such value in that public service. And so I stayed around it. I actually ended up working then for Vice President Joe Biden on his presidential campaign, who was Senator Joe Biden at the time. I think it all turned out well for everyone. And then went to Drake University and worked at the Community Foundation of Greater Dubuque and 6 of our rural counties. Was also a legislative assistant in the Iowa House for a couple of years, which is where I was when the State House seat that I currently hold came open. And I gotta tell you, it was as Sue mentioned, a lot of folks were thinking, okay, she's 24, she's paying off student loans, she's, you know, renting a house, you know, doesn't have a picket fence, all that kind of stuff. But I knew the policy. And I knew it was the right thing to do. I mean, I had to convince a few people, including my parents. I mean, you would have, when I sat them down and told them I was going to run for State House when I was 24, you would have sworn I told them I was getting a full body tattoo. They're thinking, oh my goodness, what is she doing? But, you know, they got on board pretty quickly. I got out there, I talked to folks in my community, and I knew I was the right person to take their voices down in Des Moines and stand up for them every single day. And that is what I have done the last 4 years as a state representative in Dubuque. Now, I gotta be honest, the first 2 years were tough. The last 2 years were harder. We lost that state senate in 2016. Ron Blum was still my congressman, and Donald Trump became our president. And there I was at the beginning of 2017, it was actually February of 2017, after 2 days of fighting back against the gutting of collective bargaining in our state, where they went after 184,000 Iowans, teachers, corrections officers, bus drivers, folks that are just like my family that were working their tails off, trying to provide a good life for their family, and they were watching their government make their lives harder. And there I was, taking that no vote, had tears in my eyes, and I looked up into the gallery, and I saw folks up there who also had tears in their eyes, and I remember thinking to myself, this is not how we treat people in my state or in my country, and I was going to do whatever I could to get it back. Because it was so dang personal. I mean, I grew up a daughter of a union pipe fitter welder, and my mother actually just retired from the school district as a secretary back in February. And I gotta tell you, when my mom decided to retire, I thought for sure it was because my sister had a baby about 1.5 years ago, and he's very, very cute. So I thought, well, you just want to spend more time with Jordy. And when I asked her this, she looked at me and she was like, well, yeah, Abby, Jordy's really cute. She's like, no, I'm retiring because I just turned 62. It's like, okay. And she goes, and if I'm worried if I don't retire at the age of 62, they're going to take away the age I can retire and still get my Social Security. Yeah. And she was worried about her acres. And I looked at her and I said, Mom, this is exactly why I'm running for Congress. I mean, there are folks just like my mom all across this district, all across Iowa, and all across our country who live with that anxiety every single day. And the rest of my family, there were 4 kids. We were all first-generation college graduates, still paying off student loans, so not always easy. And I still remember being a 10-year-old, having to have my dad's business agent's name memorized, so his union rep's name. Because you guys remember caller ID, the little white boxes, right? So when that name would show up on caller ID, that meant my dad had a job. And I remember sometimes those months and years where that name wasn't showing up very often, and what that was like for my family. So again, not always easy, but at the end of the day, I grew up in a state and in a country where we were promised, if you work hard, you can make it. Yeah. Again, that is what we were told, and that is what we were promised. And unfortunately, right now, I mean, that's becoming nearly impossible for folks because of the policies being pushed right now in Washington, D.C. And spearheaded by the opponent, or the guy I'm running against, Rod Blum, and his buddies in that Freedom Caucus. And speaking of Rod, he and I, well, besides just seeing each other a couple days ago, if anybody caught that.
If you have not seen the link to that debate and you're feeling low, put it on little clips.
So he and I actually got elected the exact same time in 2014. So that's when I became a state representative, and that's when he became the congressman and I was first. But I assure you, that's where similarities end. Because he spent the last 4 years in D.C. going out of his way, making it harder for my friends, my family, and my neighbors. And in contrast, I've been here in the state of Iowa fighting hard in that state house against attack after attack they have thrown at us when they went after our public education, they went after our teachers, our workers, our wages, our environment, women in our health care, you name it. They have come after it in the state of Iowa, and I tell you what, I haven't just been a vote against those attacks, I've been a voice every single time. And that's also why I decided to do this, because I thought it was about time we send a voice to Washington, D.C. It's going to make sure they remember all the folks here in Iowa and across the country that they have clearly forgotten. And as Sue said, when I decided to do this and knew it was the right thing to do, there were a lot of folks who said, oh, this can't be done. Yeah, she's 28. I'm 29 now, by the way. It'll take all the years I can get. But I was 28 at the time. Yeah, again, still paying off student loans, renting a house, all the things. come from a working class family, no money of my own to put into this, and they go, how are you going to take on a guy who can write himself $500,000 personal checks, and has, to his campaign. They also didn't know if Democrats could win in Iowa anymore. They sure did not think Democratic women could win in Iowa. And I knew they were wrong, but I didn't know exactly why they were wrong until I got out there and I started talking to folks. And within the first couple of months, I tell you what, I realized very, very quickly that 2018 wasn't coming down to whether you were a Democrat, Republican, no party, whether you lived in rural Iowa or the cities. It was coming down to our values. And who are we? Are we people who step up for our neighbors, or are we not? And the Iowa that I grew up in, the country that I grew up in, we step up for each other, whether it's for a cup of sugar or a helping hand. That is what we do every single time. And that, my friends, is why I have so much hope. See, that's the other thing. Hope. Remember, we used to talk so much about that back in 2008, also the good old days, right? And I think it's about time we start talking about hope again. Because what I've also realized, especially the last couple of months, I mean, we are not a state or a country that grows from fear and division. We grow from hope. It's about hope and the idea that you get up in the morning, you work hard, and you're not just able to make a living, you're able to have a good life. It's about hope and the idea that your kids can get a good education and do better than you did. It's about hope and the idea that, God forbid, you get sick, you don't have to file for bankruptcy. And it's about hope and the idea if you are like my sister and brother-in-law, who had that little guy I talked about earlier, year and a half old, you can work hard on your family farm, pass it on to the next generation without waking up every single morning right now worried about your future because of a trade war this administration decided to start on Twitter. It's about all of the hopes that folks across this district, across Iowa right now are hearing when they're knocking on doors and making those phone calls. Hope is what's on the line and on the ballot here in 2018. It is why we can't take a day for granted. By the way, we've got 30 days left. Yeah. And every single one matters. You know, part of why I wanted to do this, I have to be honest with you, is because I want to make sure that we're not just taking back Iowa 1 to take back the U.S. House, which, by the way, we have to have this seat to take back the U.S. House. But it was because I knew we needed it to take back the governor's mansion and that state house. There are 6 or 7 flippable state houses within my congressional district, and many of you have helped them out, and I cannot say thank you enough. They're some of the best dang candidates I've ever met or seen, and they care so much about the future of our state. And we are all going to be very proud to have them in that state house, because when we get them elected, we get to take back that state house. And when we turn out Democrats and people with no party, folks who didn't even vote last time, folks who voted the other way, who realized they got a raw deal, who want common sense and decency and respect back into our government and our politics, we get to take back our entire state and take back that governor's mansion as well. It is why we've been working our tails off over in Iowa 1. It's why you've seen a lot of my TV commercials, I'm assuming. And why we just, again, can't take it for granted. I know when we do this right, we get to take back our state and our country, and I'm asking your help and support today in a number of ways. One, y'all are very